Welcome to Mountain Crisis Services 30th Anniversary Celebration. I'm Kristen Feaster, and it's been an honor to have been the Program Director for Mountain Crisis for the past 6 years. We have an outstanding program planned for this evening featuring the founder of Mountain Crisis Services, Candy O'Donnell Brown, as well as past Executive Director Siobhan Katari and the current Executive Director Allison Tudor, who will be sharing thoughts about their years with Mountain Crisis Services. At this time, I would like to introduce our fantastic program specialist, Katie Wardle. When the pandemic hit, we never thought it would keep us from meeting to celebrate this milestone. Once it became obvious that meeting in person was not going to happen, Katie came up with the idea of a virtual celebration and has led the efforts from the beginning. Katie, tell us what's in store for this evening.
Thank you, Kristen. Yeah, so like Kristen said, we've been planning this for about a year now. So it was super depressing when we couldn't have it in person, but we decided, you know what, we're going to still celebrate, and we're still going to have our sponsors, enjoy the event that we were planning on creating. So yes, I had a virtual epiphany, and here we are. So I would like to say that we are going to turn it over to Candy O'Donnell Brown right now. Same with Siobhan and Allison. They've already pre-recorded their videos. So I'm going to transfer that over now, and then we'll see you after. Thanks.
My name's Candy O'Donnell Brown, and I want to welcome you to the 30th anniversary of Mountain Crisis Services. It's very hard to believe that, for me especially, to believe that this has been going on for 30 years. We want to welcome you to this very innovative evening. Innovation is what we do best. And I'm going to start by reading to you what I wrote one time, a long time ago, about how I got involved with this, what started it for me. Prologue, my covenant. Spots of rust felt scratchy on the palms of my hands. The ladder vibrated. I walked by this ancient ladder every day without even seeing it tucked away in its forgotten corner. But tonight it had caught my attention. Was it strong enough to hold my weight? It probably hadn't been tested in decades. I climbed anyway because I didn't see much choice. My chance of survival was better if I climbed this ladder and got out of his way than if I remained on the terrace where he could find me. It was out of character for me to be scurrying up the side of an apartment building in the middle of the night. I'm not given to weird nocturnal adventures. But during the 6 months since my wedding day, I'd found myself resorting to strange behavior so frequently that I didn't recognize myself anymore. I had nearly reached the top of a 10-story building. I peered over the parapet at the surface of the roof. I swung my leg over the edge of the precipice and onto the tar paper. I was careful not to look down as I pulled myself upward over the edge. I've always been terrified of heights. I took a few cautious steps toward the middle of the roof. The tar paper felt sandy under my shoes. I carefully shifted my weight. I didn't want to give my position away by making any noise. Now I was standing on top of a penthouse on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. It was a dark, calm night in October of 1972. A few rectangles of light came from windows in the buildings on Riverside Drive. Beyond those buildings was the blackness I knew to be the Hudson River. A door squeaked. I froze. I listened to the thuds of Bentley's footsteps as he stepped out of our apartment onto the tile terrace below. He called out my name. Candy, come back in here. There's no reason for this. You're acting crazy again. I didn't move. I held my breath. Then I heard him walk back into the apartment, and I heard the snick of the latch. He left me alone in the night. Relief. I stood still. It was autumn in New York. The weather was so beautiful they wrote a song about it. I wish I could actually feel the mild air on my skin. If I could immerse myself in it, maybe I could calm down and act normal. But something was blocking my ability to feel. In fact, I was separated from all of life as I had once known it. It was as if I were watching this drama unfold from a remote platform in the sky. I could analyze things from up here. I felt safe. I wasn't personally involved. He'd had that look on his face all evening, the one that signaled danger. I anticipated another episode, another night of accusations and threats, one more lightning flash anger aimed at me. Which of his eruptions would be the one? Did I still love Bentley? I wondered. I wasn't sure. I'd been wildly in love with him when we were engaged, but now the only feelings I could honestly identify were apprehension and terror. How could anyone act like that? Hateful, intermittently hurtful. Belittling comments and irrational demands filled my days, and unpredictable indignities filled my nights. Sometimes he lashed out physically as well, pinning me to the bed, pressing his thumbs on my throat, reminding me that my life could be snuffed at any moment. The fear of death always hovered in the back of my mind. He was obsessed by the idea that I was unfaithful. He was wild with jealousy over my imagined infidelity. But why? He wasn't being logical. He knew where I was every single minute. If he wasn't in the same room with me, he called me constantly to check up on my whereabouts. He must have realized I couldn't be doing the things he accused me of, because he never let me alone long enough to do them. I never had that much time away from him. His perception of reality was seriously warped. He must have had some sort of undiagnosed mental aberration. What else could account for his warped thinking? But who was the crazy one? I was the one who had climbed up to this Manhattan rooftop in the middle of the night while he sat comfortably in our apartment. I was the one cowering on the tar paper. Who appeared to be unhinged? I did. How did we get here? Bentley and I were among the lucky ones. We were privileged. We lived in a penthouse in New York City, for heaven's sakes. How could this be happening to us? Alone in the dark, I made a bargain with my own inner God. Let me survive this night, and I'll figure out what this is all about. I'll find a way to help others subjected to this pain. I promise. That night was 48 years ago, and I have kept my promise. I've done it by being active in the domestic violence movement that started a little after this happened. I joined the Battered Women's Service, or JBWS, in New Jersey. It started as the Jersey Abused Women's Service. They called it JAWS. They changed it before they incorporated. I think that was so that we could manage to get some money to run it. What we did started in private houses. We kept women there overnight to make sure that they couldn't be found. They ate out of our refrigerators. They used our toothpaste. It was a very, very one-on-one situation back then. And we really knew the people that we were working with, and we really bought into their success. There were no numbers. Nobody was a number. Everybody was a human being. And every single person mattered enormously to us. The Jersey Battered Women started on my dining room table and on the floor of a friend of mine in her large house where her husband had never allowed her to buy furniture, so we could just sit on the floor there. But by the time I left 11 years later, We had a 6-bedroom house. We were in the middle of a capital campaign to turn it into a 12-bedroom house. And we were very successful. It's been successful all along since then. I got to watch the whole thing. We had a lot of very powerful friendships were built then. We had a lot of setbacks. We had some disagreements. When somebody once asked me if I would ever do that again, and I said no, I wouldn't do that again. Then my husband and I, we moved to California. We came to Mariposa, which advertised itself as delightfully behind the times. What that meant was there wasn't a domestic violence agency. And we had a campground here. We bought a campground here, that's why we moved here. And the first summer that we had it, there was a couple that came to stay with us because the husband had a job coming up in Mariposa, but they ran out of money as soon as they got there. And he was working, he was getting paid, but his employer refused to give him advance on that, on the payment that he was making then. So his wife and I got in the car and I drove her down to the welfare department. And we talked to a guy named Bill Cody, who was working for CPS at the time. It's changed, but at the time it was Child Protective Services. And I told him that I had been very busy working on domestic violence on the East Coast, but that now I had a business and I was very busy running that business. The next year he called me and he said, we're starting an agency to handle domestic violence. He said, I see women all the time who are the mothers of the children that I'm dealing with, but I can't help them because they're not going to come to an agency run by the county because the county has the ability to take their children away. So what we have to do is develop an organization that is not county related. So we're going to have our first meeting, and I'd like to invite you to it. And I said, well, I'm sorry, but I have a business to run, and I'm very, very busy, and I really can't help. I just don't have the time. He said, you won't have to do anything. He said, we'll do it all. We just thought it would be nice to have you here to tell us, you know, what you've already done on the East Coast. So I went. Did I really believe I wasn't going to do anything? No, but I went anyway. Our first meeting was a group of 7 strangers that met around the table in the welfare department in their conference room. That building has now become High Country Health. The building now doesn't have the bad reputation it had then. People thought maybe there were mold in the building and they were worried about being there, but it was all that we had at the time. The people who decided to get together for that were Sandy Stewart and Bill Cody. They were the first people who made the phone calls and got everybody to come. Naturally, by spring, both of them had quit because both of them had difficult problems with their families, and they couldn't work anymore there. So, naturally, by spring, I was president. Was I surprised at that? No. I'd been there before. We incorporated March 15th of 1991. I was the person who actually carried our certificate of incorporation into the Secretary of State and put it on their table. They sent me down the street to the franchise board, and I spent all afternoon doing heaven knows what there. But apparently it worked because when I came back, they got out their rubber stamp and they stamped our certificate of incorporation, and we were incorporated. Then we applied for IRS tax exemption, and we didn't get that until January 16th, 1992. Our first domestic violence training was handled by Sandy and Brenda Logan, and sometimes me, and those meetings were Tuesdays and Thursdays starting on the 4th of September of 1990. We had our first phone, our first 24-hour phone with its own phone number. People had called us on our own phones before that. By the spring of 1991. We still have that phone number, we're still using it. During the 5 years that we were all volunteer, we actually performed all 13 services required of a domestic violence agency in the state of California. And those 13 required services are running a 24-hour hotline, providing individual and group peer counseling. We opened an office in town in 1992. We provided emergency shelter on a very short-term basis. We couldn't give people a long period of time, but they could spend the night at least away from the domestic violence situation. We gave them food and clothing. We responded to calls from the sheriff's office and went down there and talked to people whom they had brought in from the field. We responded to calls from the hospital. I went down there several times myself. We drove women to shelter and other services in our cars. We really didn't counsel their children, which we were supposed to do, but we made sure those kids were safe. We went to court with the women when they were getting restraining orders, and we sat with them during mediation when they were working out who got to take care of the children. We ended up knowing all the resources in Mariposa County. So, and we found, strangely enough, that the resources, the social service resources in Mariposa County didn't know each other very well. So in the end, we started getting them all together. That naturally happened through a domestic violence agency because we had to use every resource we had in the community in order for people to find safe lives afterward. Our services were handled by Brenda Logan and Ellie McQuarrie until September of 1992. At that point, Marcia and I took over, and she moved away in 1993. And then Ginger Lindstedt, who actually worked in the first funded program, started working with me. And we were working there until we had a professional staff and were able to open a real professional agency on September 18th, 1995. Our domestic violence movement followed a train of social justice movements. They looked very much like what we're seeing now out on the streets of people protesting. There were many different issues that people were trying to resolve by demonstrating in those days. We were the quiet movement. We didn't do as much demonstrating as the other people did because we really didn't want the husbands to know who we were. We were operating at quite a risk. I can remember worrying about getting sued for alienation of affection. We don't worry about that anymore. People who are working in domestic violence agencies don't even think about it. But it was something that kept me up at night because I had a family and I didn't really want to put all that on the table for a lawsuit. What I've learned is that if you see something wrong in the world, you really can make a change. You cannot do it alone. You have to have a lot of people helping you. But change is something that does happen, and it can be pushed along. And this is one agency that has always stood for change in a positive and more helpful way. Mariposa Mountain Crisis Services was a latecomer to this movement, but it has had a very, very strong background, and we've always been respected, which is why we've been able to save some of the smaller agencies that we were afraid we were going to lose along the way. So we've collected various agencies. It's sort of a natural thing for a domestic violence agency to do, since we need everybody's help. And now here we are.
And currently I am the Health and Human Services Director for Mariposa County. But I did spend 10 years of my life as the Director of Mountain Crisis Services and then the Alliance for Community Transformations, and it was a great 10 years. I wanted to talk a little bit today about my experience with Mountain Crisis Services. I became the Executive Director of Mountain Crisis Services in 2003. At that time we had 8 staff, and we provided services to victims of domestic violence. We provided shelter services, counseling services, and legal advocacy, and we had a lot of fun and we're a great team and really enjoyed the work. The agency expanded over the years to serve vulnerable populations in the community with the understanding that folks who are experiencing domestic violence actually have much more complex needs than I think we ever knew in the beginning of this movement. And so we began to serve folks who had issues associated with substance abuse, who were offenders, because we knew that by going to the source of the violence, that we would hopefully reduce the impact to victims and families. And we began to swim upstream as much as we could to design and to formulate new prevention strategies in the community, with the understanding that we really needed to change behavior before it got started. And so in the early years of Mountain Crisis Services, we spent a lot of time solidifying our programs. The movement really started based on a grassroots belief that we could provide shelter and other services to victims of domestic violence, and really did not focus on what we needed to, which was changing the systems that created an environment that made it really difficult for folks who were experiencing violence to leave when they needed to. In those early days, some of the major challenges that we faced were really the partnerships that we had with other people. We had a really challenging time advocating for our clients at times because we didn't have those partnerships in place with our law enforcement partners, our mental health partners, our partners from the court, for instance, and even our partners from the school. We had a hard time getting into the schools in those days because a lack of understanding about the type of work we were doing and what we were trying to accomplish. And so because of that, I spent a lot of time in the early days here in 2003, 2004, 2005, really trying to strengthen and solidify those partnerships. And that's one of the things I'm most proud of in my time at Mountain Crisis Services, is being able to really strengthen strong partnerships with the community. Today, the agency should be very proud of the work it's done with regards to partnerships with those communities around law enforcement and mental health services and child welfare services. It really has strengthened the ability to advocate for those people that most need our help and our services through the domestic violence and rape crisis programs that Mountain Crisis has been so good at providing. In addition to that, I'm really proud about the work that Mountain Crisis Services has done around prevention. I know that one of the first grants that I got after coming to Mountain Crisis Services was through the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and it was a grant to be able to work with the schools and go into the schools and work on systems and prevention strategies around the issue of bullying. Because we knew in those days that bullying had a strong link and a strong connection to domestic violence later in life, and wanted to get to some of the root causes. So up to this day, Mountain Crisis Services continues to provide really strong prevention programs for youth in the community. And even though these programs have changed the way they look over time and maybe who they're trying to reach, the strength in swimming upstream, the importance of that work is still here and still going strong today. And I'm really proud of that as well. In addition, during what I call the grassroots time of the domestic violence movement, we really relied a lot on volunteers. We relied a lot on the generosity of the community to get the work done. Over time, what happened is the funders became state and federal partners who really required us to strengthen our ability to manage administrative systems and to manage financial systems that would allow us to continue to keep those contracts moving and keep the dollars coming to provide the critical services that Mountain Crisis Services provides today. So we did do a lot of work to strengthen that infrastructure. I was also really proud that in 2006 we were able to get a community development block grant and we were able to build a domestic violence shelter. And this really led to more sustainability for the program in the future and to a really comfortable and dignified place for families to go to when they needed to escape. And those are some of the things I'm most proud of. In terms of challenges, I think like every domestic violence and rape crisis center during those early days, we were faced with stigma in the community, we were faced with lack of support from community partners, and we were faced with still a lot of victim blaming attitudes that were happening in society at large, not just in Mariposa. And so a lot of our early work really had to focus on how do we reduce stigma for victims and how do we ensure that we started by believing that when people came forward with their story that they would receive the respect and the dignity and the belief that they needed in order to start their process towards healing. And so working with our partners to ensure that when somebody went into the district attorney's office or somebody went in to make a report to law enforcement that they were believed and they were heard and they were listened to and therefore got the supports necessary was one of the early things that we focused on. And I am really proud of this community today. I'm proud of the partnerships that Mountain Crisis continues to have with the county, with the agency that I run. We've continued to partner on those programs that are really important to serve families and those programs that help to lift families who are escaping domestic violence out of poverty to get them into more sustainable housing solutions, to get them jobs. And so I'm super happy that the community has supported these partnerships. I'm looking forward to the next 30 years of continued partnership with Mountain Crisis Services. I will have to say that whenever anyone asks me what I hope will be the next 10 or 20 or 30 years for Mountain Crisis Services, my answer is always the same, which is I hope that Mountain Crisis Services doesn't have to be around in 30 years. That being said, I think that the agency has done an outstanding job morphing to address a broader scope of issues such as social justice, such as intersecting oppressions, that really is the important work to keep all people safe in our community, and I've been very impressed with their work in that regard. I'm going to be making a transition to work for the state of California, the Department of Social Services, but I will continue to watch Mariposa as it excels and continues to be a leader in the county and in the state with regards to being at the forefront and cutting edge of these types of services and partnerships and solutions for our community. Thank you.
My name is Allison Tudor, and I'm the Executive Director of the Alliance for Community Transformations currently. My time with the organization started back in 2009 when I came to work for Mountain Crisis Services as a prevention specialist. It was a part-time position that pretty quickly moved into a full-time position, and so I was able to do prevention work for quite a while at Mountain Crisis Services. And prior to coming to the Alliance and Mountain Crisis Services, I was working with young people doing outdoor education And the reason that I wanted to shift into Mountain Crisis Services was I really wanted to be working with youth in a more long-term way. So with outdoor education, I was working with kids for a week at a time, and it was definitely impactful, but I really wanted to work with youth on a more long-term. And so when I saw the position fly for Mountain Crisis, I thought this would be a great opportunity to do so. And so I was able to be a prevention specialist for many years at Mountain Crisis Services, and also got a little bit involved with prevention down at Valley Crisis Center at that time as well. And then I moved into the program director position at Mountain Crisis Services, which was really amazing. Mountain Crisis Services is an amazing organization, and I think we had some pretty big successes, and Mountain Crisis has continued to have many successes over that time. I think during my time as the program director at Mountain Crisis Services, we really were able to focus on making prevention more of a focus. The intervention work that we do at Mountain Crisis Services is absolutely vital, but another important piece of what we do at Mountain Crisis Services and at the Alliance overall is really work at creating systemic change. So how can we stop this sort of violence from ever starting? And so really expanding that prevention work was a big deal. And one thing that we did through Project Respect was really work toward trying to create an anti-bullying policy in the school district. And after many, many years of work, that went into place. And so I think that was a really big success for all of Mariposa County and Mountain Crisis Services. And then I think some other successes of the Alliance overall is really our model. So Mountain Crisis Services was our founding organization for the Alliance, and things really started to grow and expand around 2008. And I think as the Alliance overall, we've really been able to be more effective in helping our clients and other folks that participate in our programs. So it's kind of the idea that any door is the right door. So they walk into Mountain Crisis Services and they're struggling with violence in their lives, but they also may be struggling with substance use, and we can quickly get a substance use counselor over here to work with them, or they have a young person that's struggling and we can connect them with Ethos. They may also be involved in CASA, and there might be some other services that we can offer them through CASA. And so I think just really our combined force and our combined effort together has been really helpful within the community to really make sure that services aren't disjointed and that any door that folks walk in is the right door. I would say some other more recent successes for Mountain Crisis Services is really building a relationship with the Yosemite National Park. As we all know, victimization crosses county lines and jurisdictions, and so it had been a challenge to work between our local Mariposa jurisdiction and our federal jurisdiction. But Kristen Feaster has worked really hard to create and maintain that relationship with the National Park Service so we can help victims alike, no matter where they sit within our county. I think some of the challenges that we faced at Mountain Crisis Services and the Alliances alike is, we really are operating by our core values. And sometimes our core values could come across a little bit controversial in our community. And so we have sometimes been called out for helping all people in our community, which includes people of color, people with different sexual orientations, people of different ethnicities, different races, but that is who we are, and that is who we help in our community. And so we have had to face those challenges, and we continue to stay strong with who we are and who our values are as an organization. And I think just with any organization that's kind of coming together as many programs under one umbrella, we have had challenges that we've had to work through, like obviously confidentiality is a big one, and there is confidentiality between our programs, and we all work very closely together. And so that's been interesting to try to figure out how to do that, to make sure that no matter what door client walks in, it's the right door, but their information is also confidential from our other programs if that's the way that they want it. And I would say, moving forward into the next 30 years of Mountain Crisis Services and the Alliance, as far as Mountain Crisis Services goes, I think it will be really interesting to see how services shift over time. Because as we all know, there's never a one-size-fits-all for every survivor that walks in the door. And so I think that over time it will be interesting to figure out what that looks like and how we can vary our services even more to really work with each survivor and their unique circumstance as they walk in the door. And as far as the Alliance goes, over the next 30 years, we may expand, we may not, but I want to make sure that we're continuing to meet the needs in our community and continuing to do that while keeping our values at our core. So that means, continuing to maybe not always have the most popular opinion about different issues or things that are going on in town, but really just making sure that we are serving each client that walks into any of our doors, regardless of who they are, what they look like, what their beliefs are, and just making sure that we are doing the best by them. So thank you for being here and supporting Mountain Crisis Services.
As you all know, my name is Kristen Feaster, and I've been with Mountain Crisis for 16 years, and I've been serving as a program director for the past 6 years. I've been a part of many victories over the past 16 years. When I was hired on as shelter manager, Mountain Crisis was funded to build a brand new safe house for victims of domestic violence and sexual assault. So I entered into an agency during a very exciting and fulfilling time. But honestly, it has always seemed that way and continues to be as rewarding as those exciting first months. For example, just this past month, we were awarded 2 grants. One is a pet assistant and support grant that assists victims of domestic violence to be able to get out of an abusive relationship and take their pets with them. Additionally, another grant is assuring ADA accessibility for our safe house and also our business office. Not that the job doesn't present its share of challenges. It's difficult to reach out to our entire community when there's so many pockets of isolation due to geographical obstacles, making it frustrating that we aren't always able to reach all who would need our services. But we continue to strive to improve outreach to overcome this challenge. At this time, I would like to thank my hardworking staff and volunteers who do the essential and important work of this agency. They're the ones that are out there responding to calls and taking necessary action to assure the safety of victims of domestic violence and sexual assault. I would also like to thank our board of directors and our executive director who placed their trust in me to provide our essential services. I'm very proud that we have been able to keep our services available during this pandemic due to the wonderful MCS team. We all pulled together and assured that survivors were getting the services that we provide during their need of time. I would like to thank each and every one of you for joining this historic occasion. Additionally, I would like to thank our speakers, Candy O'Donnell Brown, Siobhan Katari, and Allison Tudor. Again, thank you so much for joining us on this wonderful day, 30 years of Mountain Crisis Services. So I'm going to send it back to Katie.
Thank you. Yeah, so we'd like to say thanks again. Thanks to our sponsors. It means the world to us for you sponsoring our event, even though it wasn't in person. Thank you to our donors as well. Without you guys, we would not be able to have our silent auction. Thank you to the Friends of Mountain Crisis Group, Lisa Rudy, Martha Pratt, Susan Johnson, Roberta Lindman, Kayana Baca, and Colby Feaster for all of your guys' hard work. To end our entire event, we wanted to wish Mountain Crisis a happy 30th birthday. And me and Kristen, we're going to sing to Mountain Crisis. So if you guys would all like to join us. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Mountain Crisis. Happy birthday to you. Yay! Thanks again so much for everybody for joining us. And we'll see you next year, hopefully in person.
Happy 30th anniversary, Mountain Crisis.